What's gaming, gamers? Today, I've got a Titan build for you that will almost entirely trivialize all 3 Rite of the 9 dungeons, even on Ultimatum difficulty. This build uses the Prismatic subclass, the Cuirass of the Falling Star exotic chestpiece, and the Consecration aspect to clear adds and deal significant damage to bosses incredibly frequently. This video will be biased slightly towards Spire of the Watcher, as that's the dungeon available to run as I write this script, but this build will work fantastically in all 3 dungeons, and I will be running it for all 3 myself. But before I get into the video itself, I'd like to shout out our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs. If you're looking for people to play any content in Destiny with, ranging from ritual playlist and seasonal activities all the way to raids and Grandmaster strikes, feel free to join the Discord server. We welcome anyone, no matter how new or seasoned you are, and all of us will teach encounters if you don't know something. If you're interested, hop into the Discord server and play some Destiny with us, the link is in the description. Furthermore, if you have any build ideas you'd like to see me cover, or simply have ideas for different guide-style videos you'd like to see me make, let me know in the comments. I'm looking to expand my videos from simply build guides, and I'm open to ideas. Thank you. Now for the build itself, I'll start with a prescriptive build guide in case that's what you're looking for. Once I've done that, I'll go into detail about what each element of the build does, why I've chosen them, as well as any alternative options and their pros and cons should there be any. For the prescriptive setup, use the Cuirass of the Falling Star exotic chestpiece. For your prismatic subclass, use the Arc Thundercrash Super, the Towering Barricade, whichever jump you prefer, the Strand Frenzied Blade Melee, the Strand Shackle Grenade, the Solar Consecration Aspect, the Arc Knockout Aspect, Facet of Awakening, Facet of Balance, Facet of Courage, Facet of Protection, and Facet of Sacrifice. For the Episode Heresy artifact, use the Overclock and Load mod, the Unraveling Orbs mod, the Dielectric mod, the Elemental Siphon mod, the Dreadful Finisher mod, the Flashover mod, the Gold from Lead mod, the Particle Reconstruction mod, and the Limit Break mod. For armor stat distribution, I have 30 mobility, 101 resilience, 50 recovery, 102 discipline, 31 intellect, and 100 strength. For the armor's mod setup, on your helmet, run 2 hands-on mods and 1 harmonic siphon mod. On your arms, run 2 heavy-handed mods. On your chest piece, run 1 arc, 1 solar, and 1 void resistance mod. On your legs, run 2 arc weapon surges and 1 recuperation mod. On your Titan mark, run 2 outreach mods and 1 time dilation mod. For your weapons, in your kinetic slot, run the Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun from the Crota's End raid with the perk combination of Pugilist and 1-2 punch. In your energy slot, run the Posterity Arcane Cannon from the Deepstone Crypt raid with the perk combination of Pugilist and Volt Shot. In your heavy slot, run the Queenbreaker Exotic Linear Fusion Rifle with the Combat Sight's 3-round burst scope equipped. With the entire build setup now detailed, I'll get into describing the build itself, starting with the Cuirass of the Falling Star exotic chestpiece. Cuirass of the Falling Star has the exotic perk Glorious Charge, which will increase your Thundercrash's damage by 55%, as well as granting you a 50% damage resistance for 5 seconds after using your Thundercrash. Furthermore, any melee kill you get while amplified will grant you additional super energy based on the tier of enemy killed, with higher tier enemies granting more super energy. Cuirass increasing your Thundercrash's damage will simply make it a better super for damage phases. With the Rite of the 9 version of Spire of the Watcher having extra bosses, you'll be able to deal more damage to the new bosses every time they appear. Pairing a good heavy weapon with Thundercrash's one-and-done nature makes this build fantastic for dealing high damage during almost any damage phase. The damage resistance it grants is also incredibly helpful, as it'll allow you to get into a safe position after having put yourself out of position by using Thundercrash itself. Cuirass's super generating capability is also incredibly potent. Even with the quickest of mechanic phases, you can get your super back for every single damage phase as long as you're getting melee kills while amplified. Now that you know what Cuirass of the Falling Star does, I'll get into the subclasses setup, starting with the Thundercrash Super. Thundercrash will effectively turn you into a missile, causing you to fly through the air for up to 4.5 seconds towards wherever you're aiming. While you're flying through the air, you'll have a 90% resistance to all incoming damage, and upon hitting your target, you'll deal significant damage to them. Thundercrash will also cause aftershocks every 0.75 seconds after the impact itself, which will deal damage to enemies caught within them for 4 more seconds. Overall, Thundercrash is a very simple super. Simply press your super button and crash into the boss. It's not the super itself that's the major factor of this build's damage output, it's its uptime and the increased damage granted by Cuirass that gives this build its high damage potential. Next, for your barricade, the Towering Barricade will create a tall barrier in front of you for 20 seconds that absorbs all incoming damage. The barrier itself has a health pool, but it takes 90% reduced damage from any non-boss enemy, allowing it to protect you for its entire 20-second duration nearly every time you cast it. Furthermore, while standing behind your towering barricade, you'll have a 60% resistance to all incoming splash damage, helping you to survive against enemy grenades or explosive projectiles that impact around you. The towering barricade is chosen as it'll grant you more melee ability energy via the 2 outreach mods on your mark than the rally barricade will. It'll also give you a piece of cover to hide behind, increasing your survivability in situations wherein you're forced to stand in one spot for an extended period of time. Onto your melee ability, the Frenzied Blade ability will send you forward with a strand blade, slashing enemies to deal damage to them and apply the Sever debuff to them. Frenzied Blade comes with 3 charges innately, but its cooldown is 30% slower on the Prismatic subclass than it is on the Strand subclass. Fortunately, the more charges you have available, the faster its base recharge rate will be, but this doesn't affect moment-to-moment gameplay all that much. Frenzied Blade is chosen specifically for its 3 charges and nothing more really. You won't really be using Frenzied Blade itself, it's just chosen to be used with Consecration. Its slower recharge rate is unfortunate, but having multiple charges available grants you multiple benefits compared to a faster recharging 1-charge melee. First, when you start an encounter, you'll usually have all 3 charges at your disposal to quickly clear any enemies and build super energy fast. Second, having multiple charges allows every melee energy granting source like Ionic Traces, Stacks of Bolt Charge, Facet of Balance, the Outreach Armor mod, and the Pugilist Weapon mod to work all the time. This means you won't be losing out on energy gains because your 1 charge is full, allowing you to always be working towards recharging your melee ability. Lastly, having multiple melee charges allows you to increase your Transcendence Grenade's recharge rate more often while Transcendent, increasing your total damage output while Transcendent. All of these reasons make Frenzied Blade an easy choice for this build. For your grenade, the Shackle Grenade will allow you to throw a bola towards enemies, dealing damage and applying the Suspend debuff on impact. Once it impacts an enemy or a surface, the Shackle Grenade will release 2 smaller bolas that track towards nearby enemies, which each deal a small amount of damage and apply the Suspend debuff to them as well. The Shackle Grenade is chosen mostly for its application of the Suspend debuff, as it'll work in combination with the Facet of Courage fragment to allow your light abilities to deal 10% more damage to enemies affected by any darkness debuff. Boss enemies can still have the Suspend debuff applied to them even though they can't actually be suspended. This allows you to throw the Shackle Grenade at a boss to apply the Suspend debuff, which will then cause your Thunder Crash to deal 10% more damage to them thanks to Facet of Courage. Enemies that are suspended will also take 10% more damage from your Consecration ability, making the Shackle Grenade a fantastic piece of utility for both mechanic phases and damage phases. Onto the aspects. Firstly, the Consecration aspect will allow you to use your melee ability while sliding to first launch yourself in the air while sending a wave of solar energy forward 20 meters, which will deal damage and apply 40 Scorch stacks to any enemy hit by the wave. While in the air after using Consecration, you can use your powered melee input again to slam the ground, creating a second, wider wave of energy that travels forward 20 meters. This wave will shatter stasis crystals, deal damage to non-scorched enemies, and will instantly ignite any scorched enemy. The ignition caused by Consecration is special as well, and will deal 20% more damage to all enemy combatants than a normal ignition would. Lastly, while in the Consecration animation, you'll be granted a 20% resistance to all incoming non-melee damage. Consecration is the centerpiece of this build's combat loop. Consecration is also the reason Frenzied Blade is chosen, as Frenzied Blade grants you 3 Consecration charges. Everything in this build is designed around refunding Frenzied Blade energy and charging Frenzied Blade such that you can use Consecration as often as possible. Using Consecration to get kills will grant you super energy via Cuirass of the Falling Star and the 2 hands-on mods on your helmet, health via the knockout aspect, as well as generating orbs of power thanks to the heavy-handed mods in your arms. Those orbs of power will then grant you super energy, grant you armor charge for the purpose of your 2 arc weapon surges on your legs, as well as healing you thanks to the recuperation mod also on your legs. Lastly, Consecration will grant you 3 fragment slots, which is significant for build crafting potential. The second aspect to use is Knockout. Knockout, upon getting a melee kill, will instantly grant you an amount of health based on the tier of enemy killed, begin your health regeneration, and grant you the amplified buff for 15 seconds. Furthermore, breaking an enemy's shield or dealing damage to any enemy below 30% health in any way will grant you a few buffs. It will cause your basic melee attacks to deal 100% increased damage, your powered melee attacks to deal 50% increased damage, your melee lunge distance will be increased, and your unpowered melee attacks will count as powered melee attacks for those subclass traits, armor mods, and weapon perks that require them. Knockout is essential to this build's survivability and super energy regeneration. On top of instantly starting your health regeneration, it will just grant you health instantly when your powered melee gets a kill. This is on top of the 70 health granted by recuperation when you pick up the Orb of Power your melee kill will generate. Additionally, Knockout will instantly grant you the Amplified buff when you get a melee kill. This is crucial for your Cuirass of the Falling Star chest piece, as Cuirass requires you to be amplified when you get melee kills to be granted its extra super energy. You could simply become amplified by getting rapid arc kills, which is perfectly doable, but Knockout prevents you from having to worry about ensuring you're amplified before you use Consecration, as Consecration itself will amplify you. Unfortunately, Knockout only grants 2 fragment slots, but its usefulness to this build far outweighs this slight loss of build crafting potential. Onto the fragments. Firstly, Facet of Awakening will cause the rapid defeat of enemies with any one specific damage type to create an elemental pickup that matches that damage type. Facet of Awakening does come with a 5-second cooldown between generating the same elemental pickup, meaning you'll only be able to generate one of the same elemental pickup every 5 seconds. Furthermore, kills with that same element while this cooldown is active do not count towards generating the next elemental pickup. Lastly, Facet of Awakening comes with a 10-point boost to your Resilience stat, which is a great stat to have an extra 10 points in. Facet of Awakening is chosen for its ability to generate multiple pickups for this build. You'll be able to generate Fire Sprites with Consecration, which will grant your Shackle Grenade 6.25% energy upon their collection. You'll also be able to generate Ionic Traces with your Arc Weapons, which will grant you energy for all of your abilities upon their collection. Lastly, you'll be able to generate Tangles with your Shackle Grenade, which will serve as a small extra piece of damage onto any enemy you throw it at. The second fragment, Facet of Balance, will grant you 6% Frenzied Blade energy upon getting 3 rapid light damage kills, and 5% Shackle Grenade energy upon getting 3 rapid darkness damage kills. Facet of Balance has no intrinsic cooldown, meaning the more quickly you get kills, the more ability energy you'll be able to generate. Facet of Balance is chosen specifically for its melee energy regeneration. This build will be getting light damage kills incredibly frequently with Consecration and weapons, meaning you'll be able to take advantage of its melee energy constantly. This will simply help you to keep your Frenzied Blade active more often, allowing you to use it for all its benefits more frequently. Facet of Balance's grenade energy gains will see significantly less use, but if you're killing enemies with the Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun, Tangles, or any other darkness damage, you will see a slight boost in grenade energy uptime. Third for fragments is Facet of Courage. Facet of Courage will cause light damage abilities to deal 10% more damage to enemies afflicted with any darkness debuff. Darkness debuffs include Stasis, Slow, and Freeze, as well as Strand Sever, Suspend, and Unravel. Facet of Courage also comes with a 10-point boost to your Discipline stat. Facet of Courage is brought specifically to increase your Thunder Crashes and your Consecration's total damage. This build will be able to suspend enemies via the Shackle Grenade, apply the Unravel debuff via the Unraveling Orbs artifact mod, and apply the Sever debuff via your Frenzied Blade melee. However, using Frenzied Blade to apply Sever isn't really recommended, as that will take away from your Consecration ability. Fourth for fragments is Facet of Protection. Facet of Protection will grant you 15% increased damage resistance to all incoming damage while within 15 meters of 3 or more enemies. Furthermore, Facet of Protection's damage resistance stacks with Transcendence's 20% intrinsic damage resistance, combining for an overall 32% damage resistance while both Facet of Protection and Transcendence are active. Lastly, Facet of Protection will increase your strength stat by 10 points, which is a nice boost to your Frenzied Blade's passive cooldown. Facet of Protection is brought specifically for its damage resistance. As this build is a melee-oriented build, you'll be near enough enemies often enough to benefit noticeably from the increased survivability of its damage resistance. It'll also allow you to be even more resistant to damage when procced while Transcendent, which will increase your survivability even further. The fifth fragment, Facet of Sacrifice, will cause every ability kill you get while you have any light element buff to grant you an additional 1% Darkness Transcendence energy. Light element buffs include Arc Amplified and Bolt Charge, Solar Cure, Radiant, and Restoration, and Void Devour, Invisibility, and Overshield. You'll be amplified with this build almost all the time thanks to the knockout aspect and your arc weapon kills, meaning every kill you get with any of your abilities will grant you the increased Darkness Transcendence energy. This is important for your Transcendence uptime, as this build only has 2 main ways of dealing darkness damage in the Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun and the Shackle Grenade. Sure, you could use your Frenzied Blade ability to deal darkness damage as well, but that's really a waste, and you should instead be using Consecration. If you're dealing damage and killing enemies with your Swordbreaker Shotgun or Tangles, you'll be able to generate Darkness Transcendence energy that way, but Facet of Sacrifice will simply increase the total amount of energy you can generate, increasing your Transcendence uptime. With the subclasses setup now detailed, I'll get into describing the artifact mods to run if you're watching this video during Act 3 of Episode Heresy. Firstly, for artifact mods, the Overclock and Load mod will grant your arc weapons a boost to both their handling and reload stats while you're amplified or have any stacks of bolt charge. Admittedly, this mod is pretty underwhelming and won't be noticeable in general gameplay. However, it's a free weapon stat boost, so there's really no point in not equipping it. The second artifact mod to run is Unraveling Orbs. The Unraveling Orbs mod will grant your strand weapons unraveling rounds for 14 seconds upon the collection of any orb of power or upon throwing a tangle. Furthermore, while the mod is boosted by having an active ritual in the Tome of Want, your strand weapons will deal 5% more damage to any enemy afflicted with a strand debuff. Unraveling Orbs is chosen for two reasons. Firstly, it'll allow your Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun to apply the Unravel debuff to enemies, which will pair with the Facet of Courage Fragment to allow your light abilities to deal 10% more damage to those enemies. Second, it'll simply increase the damage output of your Swordbreaker as the Unravel debuff damages enemies over time. The third artifact mod to run, Dielectric, will cause the defeat of any arc debuff target to instantly grant you a stack of Bolt Charge. Furthermore, while the mod is boosted by having an active ritual in the Tome of Want, rapidly defeating enemies afflicted with arc debuffs will cause an Orb of Power to be summoned and will grant you a burst of healing. Dielectric is nice for this build's damage output, as it'll allow you to generate stacks of Bolt Charge passively by getting kills with your arc energy weapon. As long as it has an arc debuff applying perk like Volt Shot or Jolting Feedback, you'll be able to generate constant stacks of Bolt Charge by getting kills with the weapon. Admittedly, this mod won't see too much use on its own, but it is nice for passive Bolt Charge generation. Fourth, for artifact mods, the Elemental Siphon mod will grant you an elemental pickup that matches your super's energy type upon scoring 3 kills within 3 seconds of each other with either a kinetic or super element matching weapon. While Elemental Siphon is boosted by having an active ritual in the Tome of Want, collecting an elemental pickup that matches your super's element will grant you super energy. Elemental Siphon will be a good mod for regenerating your abilities, as rapid kills with your arc energy weapon will cause an Ionic Trace to be summoned, granting you ability energy. Furthermore, while boosted, Elemental Siphon will cause any Ionic Trace collected to grant you super energy, which even further increases your Thunder Crash's uptime. I recommend having Elemental Siphon boosted over Dielectric for this build, as the increased Thunder Crash uptime can be helpful for short mechanic phases in the Rite of the 9 dungeons. The fifth artifact mod to run is Dreadful Finisher. Dreadful Finisher will allow you to use your finisher on elite and mini-boss combatants to spawn a special ammo brick for yourself and your allies, with finishing subjugators, tormentors, and champions granting a second special brick for both yourself and your allies. Ammo bricks summoned by Dreadful Finisher will grant you around 5% of your special ammo weapon's total ammo and are affected by scavenger mods. Lastly, the second ammo brick summoned when defeating subjugators, tormentors, or champions grants slightly less ammo. Dreadful Finisher effectively ensures both your and your teammates' special weapons will constantly have ammo so long as you're using your finisher on elite level enemies. The Rite of the 9 dungeons don't have any subjugators, tormentors, or champions, as of yet anyways, so you won't see the second ammo brick. However, the special brick will also count for the Gold from Lead artifact mod, but I'll talk more about that interaction shortly. The sixth artifact mod to run, Flashover, will cause you to instantly become amplified for 15 seconds upon receiving 10 stacks of Bolt Charge. Next, and more importantly for this build, Flashover increases the damage dealt by your Bolt Charge Lightning Strike by 150%. Flashover is a mod chosen specifically for its increase to your Bolt Charge's damage and not really its granting of the Amplified buff. You won't really be getting Bolt Charge all too often, but when you have it, having the Lightning Strike more than doubled will help noticeably with your damage numbers. Furthermore, while I've played Rite of the 9, one of my teammates has always been running Arc Titan with the Storm's Keep aspect, and as that's the case, running Flashover increases the total amount of damage I can deal with Bolt Charge during damage phases. Seventh, for artifact mods, the Gold from Lead mod will grant you 8% of your heavy weapon's total ammo, rounded up, upon collecting between 3 and 4 special ammo bricks. Special ammo finder bricks do count towards this counter, but dying will reset the counter, forcing you to have to collect another 3 to 4 special bricks before being granted heavy ammo. Furthermore, Gold from Lead is not affected by scavenger mods and will always only grant its default 8% heavy ammo. Gold from Lead is chosen to increase your heavy weapon's uptime by constantly feeding it with a source of ammo. Paired with the Dreadful Finisher mod, you'll be summoning much more special ammo than normal, especially if your teammates are also running Dreadful Finisher. As that's the case, you'll be granted Gold from Lead's heavy ammo much more often than you otherwise would, and you'll have to farm for ammo much less than you otherwise would. Eighth for artifact mods is Particle Reconstruction. Particle Reconstruction will allow any fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle hit on an enemy to apply a unique stacking weaken effect that increases damage dealt to that enemy by fusion and linear fusion rifles only. At 1 stack, any fusion rifle will deal 5% more damage, all the way up to 27.6% extra damage at 5 stacks of the debuff. Any 30% weaken debuff will override this effect, however, such as Hunter Tether and Tractor Cannon. Furthermore, the 15% debuff applied by Divinity also overrides Particle Reconstruction's debuff, which will cause you to deal less damage than you would without it. Lastly, upon hitting an enemy with 50% of your fusion rifle's magazine rounded down +1, you'll have 10% of your fusion rifle's magazine refunded. Particle reconstruction is fantastic for any fusion rifle. Using the mod will increase your damage against any enemy you hit with them by up to almost 30%, significantly helping in the Rite of the 9 dungeons, wherein you only have a certain number of phases before the boss enrages, wiping you and your team. It's chosen specifically for this reason and will help you and your teammates deal enough damage to make the breakpoints for the bosses in all 3 Rite of the 9 dungeons. Ninth and finally for artifact mods, the Limit Break mod will grant your super 30% increased damage for 8 seconds if you cast it while either at critical health or while you have a super element matching buff. Limit Break will simply increase your Thundergrash's damage further so long as you cast it while either at critical health, while amplified, or while you have any stacks of Bolt Charge. As you'll be amplified often thanks to the knockout aspect, you'll almost always have access to Limit Break's 30% increased Thundercrash damage, helping you to deal much more damage than you otherwise would be able to. Combined with the Cuirass exotic Chestpiece and the Facet of Courage fragment, your Thundercrash will be dealing significantly more damage than it does on its own. With episode Heresy mechanics now detailed, I'll get into the armors setup for this build, starting with stat distribution. In the top 3 grouping of mobility, resilience, and recovery, spec into resilience first, with recovery second, and ignore mobility altogether. Resilience will be the most important stat for this build altogether. Every tier of resilience you have will slightly increase your total amount of health, as well as increasing your base overall damage resistance to all incoming damage. At tier 10 resilience, you have a maximum of 200 health and a significant 30% resistance to all incoming damage. Furthermore, it's the Titan class stat, meaning higher tiers of resilience will positively affect the cooldown of your barricade. The higher your resilience is, the faster your barricade will recharge. Having tier 10 resilience grants you the maximum base health and damage resistance values, as well as lowering the cooldown of your towering barricade to a base 41 seconds. You should always be at tier 10 resilience with this build, prioritize it over every other stat in the game. Recovery will be the second most important stat in the top 3 grouping. Recovery dictates both the delay between taking damage and the start of your health regeneration, as well as the rate at which your health regenerates. Higher tiers of recovery lower the delay and increase the rate of health regeneration. You won't need too many points in recovery, as you'll be healing actively most of the time with the knockout aspect and the recuperation legs mod. However, because knockout specifically starts basic health regeneration, that health regeneration can be interrupted. Thus, having a higher tier of recovery would be beneficial, as it will increase your health regeneration rate, granting you more health in a shorter period of time. However, I only have tier 5 recovery, and I find it to be plenty for me personally, even on the Ultimatum difficulty in the Rite of the 9 dungeons. Third in the top 3 stat grouping is mobility. Mobility increases your walking, strafing, and crouching movement speeds, as well as your initial jump height. It doesn't affect your sprint speed. Mobility is entirely unimportant for this build, especially with its amplified uptime. Amplified grants you 50 points to your mobility stat while active, meaning if, like me, you only have 30 points in mobility, whenever you're amplified you'll actually have 80 mobility. Still, try to stay at 30 points of mobility. Being at tier 3 mobility will ensure you don't miss particularly long or high height jumps. In the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec into Strength first, with Discipline second, and ignore Intellect altogether. Strength will be the most important stat in the bottom 3 grouping, as it dictates the base recharge rate of your melee ability. Your melee's base recharge rate, as governed by the Strength stat, doesn't affect any active ability energy gains, and will only affect the passive recharge rate of the melee ability itself. Strength decreasing the passive cooldown of your Frenzied Blade ability means you'll have it off cooldown more often. At tier 10 Strength, your Frenzied Blade's base cooldown will be halved, letting it recharge passively twice as fast. As the melee ability is this build's main ability, having strength as high as possible lets you use it as often as possible. Discipline is the second most important stat in the bottom 3 grouping. It will dictate the base recharge rate of your grenade ability. Similarly to Strength, your grenade's base recharge rate, as governed by the Discipline stat, doesn't affect any active ability energy gains and will only affect the passive recharge rate of the grenade ability itself. Having Discipline higher means you'll have your Shackle Grenade off cooldown more often, allowing you to use it to apply the Suspend debuff to enemies more often. In my experience using this build, I've sometimes had my super generate faster than the grenade. This isn't good, as it means you won't be able to apply the Suspend debuff to enemies to increase your Thundercrash's damage. Fortunately, having higher tiers of Discipline can alleviate that. At tier 10 Discipline, similar to Strength, your grenade's base cooldown will be halved. Thus, get your Discipline as high as you can get it after you've already gotten tier 10 Resilience and Strength. Lastly, for the bottom 3 grouping is Intellect. All Intellect does is lower the base cooldown of your super. At tier 10 Intellect, your super will passively recharge 31% faster than it would at its base of tier 3. This is altogether entirely unimportant, especially given how significant this build's active super energy gains are. With Armour's stat distribution now detailed, I'll get into the Armour's mod setup for this build, starting with the Helmets mods. Firstly, the two hands-on mods together will serve to increase the amount of super energy gained when getting powered melee kills. This is important for this build, as Thundercrash uptime is the main goal of this build. Additionally, hands-on will stack with the increased super energy gains granted by Cuirass while amplified, affording even further increased super energy gains when getting powered melee kills. Next, the Harmonic Siphon mod will cause an Orb of Power to be summoned upon getting 2 arc weapon kills within 3 seconds of each other. Orbs of Power will be important for this build as they'll grant super energy, armor charge for the arc weapon surge mods, health via the recuperation mod, and will grant your strand weapons unraveling rounds thanks to the Unraveling Orbs artifact mod. The granted super energy is helpful for increasing your Thundercrash's uptime. Furthermore, having armor charge will allow your arc weapon surge mods to increase your arc weapon damage, making it easier to generate further orbs of power with the Siphon mod, as well as increasing your boss damage with Creanbreaker. The health from recuperation when picking up an orb of power will help your survivability noticeably, and unraveling rounds for your strand weapons will grant you another source of applying darkness debuffs to enemies for the purposes of Facet of Courage. Onto your arms, the two heavy-handed mods together will generate a potent orb of power upon getting a kill with your powered melee attack. With 2 heavy-handed mods equipped, heavy-handed will have a 5-second cooldown applied to it, meaning you'll only be able to generate an orb of power via powered melee kills once every 5 seconds. However, in an encounter, you won't run into this cooldown very often unless you're rapidly using your consecration ability. If you had 3 heavy-handed mods equipped, the orb of power generated would be more potent, granting you more super energy, and heavy-handed itself would only have a 1-second cooldown. I personally don't find the 5-second cooldown with 2 mods to be negative, but if you find it's hindering you, you can equip a 3rd heavy-handed mod to lower the cooldown to 1 second. For your chest piece, simply running whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running will suffice. For general, low-level content, I usually just run 1 Arc, 1 Solar, and 1 Void resistance mod. But when running higher difficulty content, or any content with a threat modifier, I will change my resistance mods accordingly. In higher difficulty content, it's smart to think of what enemy type you'll be fighting against, as they generally have 1 or 2 main sources of damage. For the Spire of the Watcher dungeon in Rite of the Nine, I use 1 solar resistance mod and 2 void resistance mods. As the main enemy type is the Vex, all of the Minotaurs, Cyclopses, Hydras, Harpies, and the final boss, Perseus, deal significant void damage. Thus, having 2 void resistance mods helps noticeably to not just get one shot by their attacks. Furthermore, all of the Goblins, Hobgoblins, and the Harpy boss deal solar damage with their weapons, making 1 solar resistance mod incredibly helpful for surviving damage from those enemies. If you wanted, you could swap out the solar resistance for an arc resistance mod, as the Goblins leave pools of arc damage when they die, and the Supplicants deal arc damage when they explode. However, I find solar to be harder to avoid personally, and as that's the case, I run 1 solar resistance mod. Onto your legs, firstly, the 2 arc weapon surge mods together will grant your arc weapons a 17% boost to their damage while you have any stacks of armor charge. This is a 70% increase in damage over just having 1 arc weapon surge mod equipped. The weapon surge mods will help your arc energy weapon to kill enemies on its own, helping you to deal with enemies when you don't have any abilities charged, or simply to generate orbs of power and ability energy via the Pugilist perk. Furthermore, it'll help your Queenbreaker linear fusion rifles damage significantly, making it incredibly potent, especially when combined with the Particle Reconstruction artifact mod's weaken debuff application. Next, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health instantly upon the collection of any orb of power with no cooldown. Recuperation is an incredible survivability mod, and will help you to stay alive in higher difficulty content where enemies are more accurate and your health regeneration from the knockout aspect gets interrupted more often. It'll also allow you to regenerate your health even when you don't have any melee charges, as your arc weapons can generate orbs of power via the Harmonic Siphon mod, which will grant health upon collection. Onto your marks mods, firstly, the 2 outreach mods together will grant your Frenzied Blade 17% energy instantly upon the use of your Towering Barricade. This will noticeably increase your Frenzied Blade's uptime, and as you'll have tier 10 resilience anyways, you'll have your Barricade off cooldown often. This will let you take advantage of outreach more often, in turn increasing your melee ability uptime. Lastly, for armor mods, the Time Dilation mod by itself will cause your decaying armor charge stacks to each last 50% longer. This increases each stack's duration to 15 seconds instead of its base of 10. Having Time Dilation equipped will simply allow your armor charge stacks to go further, letting you deal 17% more damage with your arc weapons more often. This also allows you more time between collecting orbs of power, giving you freedom to decide whether an orb is safe to collect or not. Now that I've detailed the armor's mod setup, I'll get into my recommendations for weapon choice for this build. I'll go over each slot in order, from kinetic to energy and then power, detailing my prescriptive weapon choice and why I've chosen that specific weapon. Once I've done that, I'll then give a few alternative options if you don't have those weapons, don't want to use those weapons, or otherwise want to use something different. In the kinetic slot, I run the Swordbreaker Strand Shotgun from the Crota's End raid with the perk combination of Pugilist and 1-2 Punch. I run Swordbreaker with this perk combination for 2 reasons. Firstly, Pugilist is an integral weapon perk to have. Additionally, on fusion rifles, glaives, shotguns, and sniper rifles, the Pugilist perk is enhanced, and will grant you double the melee energy you'd get from Pugilist on any other weapon type. This makes Pugilist on any one of those weapon archetypes fantastic for this build, as you'll deal more damage to those enemies with the special weapon, and be granted more melee energy when you kill them. Second, Swordbreaker is a strand weapon, meaning it'll grant Darkness Transcendence energy whenever you deal damage or get kills with it. As its strand as well, it'll also summon a Tangle if you get multiple rapid kills with the weapon thanks to Facet of Awakening. Throwing or destroying this Tangle will then grant you more Darkness Transcendence energy if it deals damage to enemies. Third, it'll help with your knockout melee's damage via the 1-2 Punch mod, helping you to deal with higher health mages and elites much faster than just by using your shotgun on its own. Unfortunately, 1-2 Punch doesn't affect your Consecration's damage at all. However, Swordbreaker itself isn't necessary. Pugilist is the most important perk to have on the kinetic slot weapon. Unfortunately though, there are only 2 darkness damage shotguns that can roll Pugilist. Those are Swordbreaker, as I've mentioned, and the No Reprieve Stasis Slug shotgun from the Season of Plunder. No Reprieve isn't acquirable anymore, meaning the only darkness aligned shotgun that can roll Pugilist is Swordbreaker. Furthermore, there aren't any fusion rifles in the kinetic slot that can roll Pugilist. Now, you can run a kinetic shotgun with Pugilist, and there are a few of those. However, it will lower the amount of Darkness Transcendence energy granted by the weapon by 50%. Those shotguns are the Heritage Slug Frame Kinetic Shotgun from the Deepstone Crypt raid, the Perfect Paradox Kinetic Shotgun from Episode Echoes, and the Wastelander M5 Kinetic Shotgun from Dares of Eternity. Any one of those shotguns can drop Pugilist and will work with this build. Wastelander M5 is probably the easiest to farm, as it's craftable and available from Dares of Eternity, which is an easy activity to run. For the energy slot, I use the Posterity Arcane Cannon from the Deepstone Crypt raid with the perk combination of Pugilist and Volt Shot. I choose Posterity specifically for its origin trait, Bray Inheritance. Bray Inheritance grants a very small amount of energy for all 3 of your abilities every time you deal damage with the weapon. This includes damage dealt by the Jolt from Volt Shot, as well as any hits you get with the weapon itself. However, as is the case with your kinetic slot weapon, Pugilist is the only important perk. There are a few other arc primaries that can roll Pugilist, and they are the Ikelos V3 SMG from the Season of the Seraph, now acquirable via the Operation Seraph's Shield exotic mission, the Corasian Heavy Burst Pulse Rifle from Episode Echoes, the Division Heavy Burst Sidearm from Episode Heresy, and the Noxious Vetiver SMG from Episode Revenant. Onto the heavy slot, I use the Queenbreaker Exotic Linear Fusion Rifle. Queenbreaker is a fantastic weapon for damage, especially with its new catalyst granting the weapon rewind rounds. Furthermore, it's an arc weapon, meaning it'll synergize with the arc weapon surge mods slotted in your legs. Additionally, as it's a linear fusion rifle, it'll work with the Particle Reconstruction Artifact mod, which will allow it to grant itself 27% more damage overall against any enemy you hit with it. Queenbreaker is also an incredibly easy weapon to use, and almost every boss in each Rite of the 9 dungeon has a crit that's easy to hit, making Queenbreaker a great weapon for use in the dungeons. With the entire build now detailed, I'll get into the playstyle I use with this build, which will hopefully teach you some things about the build itself. The biggest thing with this build is to just get as many melee kills as you can to recharge your super as fast as possible. Recharging the melee is done with Facet of Awakening, generating Ionic Traces, Facet of Balance with rapid light damage kills, using your class ability with the 2 Outreach mods on your mark, and the Pugilist weapon perk. As far as survivability goes, getting Consecration kills will heal you via the knockout aspect, as well as generating Orbs of Power, which can then be collected to heal you via the recuperation mod on your legs. When it comes to damage phases, I generally like to use a full magazine of Queenbreaker, including its rewind round refills, before using Thunder Crash. This ensures I get as much DPS as possible, as using Thunder Crash puts you out of position and will make using Queenbreaker for damage more difficult. Using Thunder Crash first allows me to reload Queenbreaker while I return to a safe spot for dealing damage, ensuring I maximize my DPS during any given phase. However, pay attention to your amplified timer. If your timer runs out before you can use a full Queenbreaker magazine, use Thunder Crash first. The extra 30% super damage granted by the Limit Break mod when you cast your super while having a super element matching buff or when critically wounded will far outweigh the extra DPS gained by using Queenbreaker first. Also, as far as I know, having Bolt Charge counts as having an arc buff for the purposes of Limit Break. However, I'm unsure as to whether or not simply having any stacks of bolt charge counts, or if you have to have bolt charge ready. Another tip though, if you do have bolt charge ready, don't throw your shackle grenade at the boss before you thunder crash, as that'll cause you to lose bolt charge before you cast your super. Limit Break's 30% damage buff is significantly higher than Facet of Courage's 10% buff, so paying attention to your bolt charge can increase your damage significantly. If you're also amplified, you can make use of both Facet of Courage and Limit Break, but if you don't have amplified and you have bolt charge ready, simply use your thunder crash instead of throwing your shackle grenade first. But that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or constructive criticisms, please leave them in the comments section. I read all of them and reply to all that I can. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing. Lastly, if you'd like to join our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs, or simply play some Destiny with us, you can learn more about that by joining our Discord server. The link is in the description. Again, thank you for watching and have a great day.